सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
In this edition of Global Print, I'm going to talk to you about Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Samarkand, Uzbekistan, where he's going to participate in the meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It's a summit, actually, where the Chinese President Xi Jinping, the Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Pakistan Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and the Turkish President Mr. Recep Erdogan are all going to be present. But of course, the reason this is going to be such an interesting summit meeting is because the Prime Minister is going to meet the Chinese President, Mr. Xi Jinping, for the first time since April 2020. So over the last 2 years, since Chinese troops have been sitting on the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. So Indian and Chinese troops are sort of eyeball to eyeball and have been for the last 2 years or so. Of course, the Prime Minister is also going to be meeting President Putin of Russia, which is something to watch out for because India has been buying a lot of discounted oil from Russia since the war with Ukraine began, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine about 6 months ago. And of course, it's always very interesting for the Indian and Pakistani Prime Ministers to meet. And they are expected to meet at the SCO summit. But before I go on, dear viewer, and before I explain to you the significance of the summit, why it's important that Prime Minister Modi is there and why he's going to be meeting all these people, I'd like to make an appeal to you. Please do consider subscribing to The Print, paying just a little bit. It's very little money, rupees 159 only. So all you have to do is to click on the join button and subscribe. Pay that sum of money for which you will get not just benefits, but extra benefits as a subscriber, privileges that non-subscribers don't have. So I urge you to click on the join button and help us with the free, fair, objective and unhyphenated journalism that The Print is increasingly getting to be known for. Now back to my column Global Print on the Print's website, in which I talk about Prime Minister Modi's visit to the SCO summit, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit in Samarkand. And he will be there on the 15th and the 16th of this month, in a couple of days from now. But simultaneously, dear viewer, I'd also like to point out that there seems to be some anxiety, some unease, some tension between the Western nations and India. And, there are 2 or 3 reasons for that, or perhaps manifestations that we see regarding this anxiety. First of all, I think the US and the rest of the Western world are not too happy about the fact that India continues to buy Russian oil. It's highly discounted, of course, as much as $29 per barrel. That's about 25 to 30% of the normal prices. And the Americans have made their unhappiness, their displeasure felt these last few months. But as the Petroleum Minister Hardeep Singh Puri told CNBC, the TV network, a few days ago, that he has to worry about the economy. And if a country of 1.4 billion, which is what India is, if we are going to start buying, or if India is going to start buying oil at the soaring rates which it has reached, then that is going to have a huge impact on India's budget, on its export bill. And that, of course, will have a cascading effect, as we know, on prices at home. As it is, the economy is very shaky. Unemployment is not great. So naturally, India will look out for nations which are selling it the cheapest oil that it can. And as we know, India is dependent hugely on energy. In fact, as much as 80% of its energy bill is imported. And earlier, we've seen how External Affairs Minister Mr. Jaishankar, in response to international criticism that India continues to buy oil from Russia, says, and had said, and these are his famous last words, which is that India buys less oil in a month than all of Europe buys in one afternoon. So, having said that, this continuing anxiety on the part of the West that India is continuing to buy discounted oil from Russia, that is one manifestation. The second is that I think the capitals, Washington, D.C., London, in Germany, that's Berlin, in the rest of Europe, are going to be watching very closely the photo op that you will probably have at the SCO summit. So as you can imagine, the photo op in which you have Prime Minister Modi, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin, imagine that photo op that will be splashed or likely will be splashed in the international media. And what are people going to say? That Prime Minister Modi is hanging out with these dictators, both like Putin and Xi Jinping, definitely. Now, there may be some truth in that for sure, but I think we have to ask ourselves why the Prime Minister is meeting Xi Jinping, and that is a burden of my column this week. And I'm going to tell you what really happened behind the scenes. Now, in July of this year, which is a couple of months ago, you had the 16th round of talks between India and China on the possible disengagement of Chinese troops from the LAC, which is the line of actual control in eastern Ladakh. We know that Chinese troops have been there and at various other points in Ladakh where they have not allowed Indian troops to patrol where they were patrolling earlier, whether it is in the Hot Springs, Gogra area. Earlier there was an agreement on disengagement in the Pangong Sol Lake. So there are these four or five patrolling points. Now what happened is that in the 16th round, so 16 rounds have been held between the Indian and Chinese sides, there was no agreement once again on disengagement of Chinese troops. So as the date for the SCO summit neared, it was put out, the Chinese put out that they would like, of course, they had that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's invitation was naturally there, but the Indian side decided to play hardball. And they told the Chinese that unless the Chinese troops get back or disengage from their positions on the LAC, Prime Minister Modi would not visit Samarkand. Now, this was quite a risky move to play, but I think the Indian leadership understood that not only was it the only thing to do, because the Indian public would not accept, would not tolerate, and would be quite upset at the fact that Prime Minister Modi would shake hands with Xi Jinping, with the Chinese leader, when Chinese troops are on the LAC in Ladakh. And if you remember a couple of years ago, and in the Galwan Valley, there was this terrible incident when 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives, as did 4 Chinese soldiers. Now, maybe more Chinese soldiers also died in that incident. We don't know, but we at least know that 4 people from the Chinese side died. So this move, very bold, very much in your face, very direct, was undertaken by the Indian government. They told the Chinese that unless you back off, unless you disengage, unless you get off the LAC, Prime Minister Modi is not going to be going to Samarkand for the SCO summit. Now, for Modi not to have gone would have been a slap in the face of Xi Jinping, because remember that the SCO, the name suggests as much, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is a Chinese-led, Chinese-controlled, it's the face of China's multilateral diplomacy. And you want, this great leader of China, the dear leader, who, in fact, when he goes back home to Beijing, next month in October will be the National People's Congress, which is where Mr. Xi Jinping is going to be elected once again, probably for life. And of course, he's called the dear leader by all his comrades. So the dear leader, Mr. Xi, would not have liked his coming out party after COVID to be ruined by the fact that Prime Minister Modi, a fellow Asian leader of a fellow Asian power, was refusing outright to come to his party. So I think the Chinese thought long and hard, and they agreed, because they understood that the Indians were very serious about what they were saying. And that's why you saw the disengagement of Chinese troops from patrolling point 15, PP15, which is the Hot Springs Gogra area. And that started almost immediately. on the 8th of September, as soon as the announcement was made, at 8:30 a.m., the Chinese troops began to withdraw, and now I believe that the withdrawal is complete. So before Prime Minister Modi goes to Samarkand, Chinese troops have returned to status quo ante. So which means that now all the 4 or 5 points the 4 or 5 places on the LAC in eastern Ladakh are completely free of Chinese troops. And that's how Prime Minister Modi will meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping as equals, as fellow powers on the same stage. They will shake hands. It will be the photo op of the summit, most likely. But remember that there is a precedent to this, which is from 2017, when there was a face-off between Indian and Chinese troops on the Doklam plateau, which is in Bhutan. And the Chinese had advanced in the Doklam plateau, in fact, advanced so far that they were in danger of coming closer to the Chicken's Neck area, which is the sliver of territory that connects India's mainland to the northeast. That was a very dangerous maneuver, and Indian troops who were positioned there told them to back off. When they refused to back off, I think there was, if you remember, dear viewer, there was this eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation which lasted about 73 days in the middle of 2017. Now, how did that end, and why did it end at 73 days? What happened at the time was that there was going to be a BRICS meeting in China in a city called Xiamen, which Prime Minister Modi was supposed to have attended. Now, if the BRICS acronym is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So 5 countries. So Prime Minister Modi, one of those 5 nations, was supposed to attend that BRICS summit in Xiamen. But the Indian leadership put out that if Chinese troops do not go back to status quo ante and withdraw from these advanced positions that they had taken in Bhutan, on Bhutanese territory, on the Doklam plateau, then Prime Minister Modi would not go to China to attend the BRICS summit. Again, as you can imagine, it was a very brave and perhaps a risky move. But the Indian leadership was very strongly determined and believed that there was no other way to do it, that the Chinese needed to be shown their place. The difference between the current situation, which is that Prime Minister Modi's visit to Samarkand, and if you compare that with the 2017 Doklam maneuver, is that in 2017, this happened in Bhutan, in a third country. In 2022, the Chinese troops are on the line of actual control, which is between India and China. So I would say, dear viewer, that in this particular case, the Indian leadership has shown its resolve, its determination to stand upright. It's asserted itself in the face of Chinese power. And that is the big story this week on Global Print. So I do hope that you will read my column on the website, and I look forward to hearing your suggestions on this video. Thank you so much for watching.